Before we get into this volume, I'd just like to inform you that we'll be taking a 4-week break from the Psychology of Entrepreneurship to work on some other exciting projects. If 4 weeks sounds a little too long for you, then this is a perfect time to catch up on any other volumes from our previous guests, covering a range of different angles of entrepreneurship. From Melissa Ambrosini helping us silence our inner critics in Volume 21, to Hal Elrod setting us up with the perfect morning routine in Volume 38. We even got into the devastating history of Indigenous Australia and how we can move forward through leadership in an eye-opening conversation with Mundanara Bales spanning across volumes 45 and 46. Ronsley will still be holding regular sessions on Clubhouse during this time though. So if you'd like to be part of these conversations in real time, then make sure you follow Ronsley and join the Psychology of Entrepreneurship Club there to keep updated. We'd like to thank you as our listeners for supporting us and our message through the Psychology of Entrepreneurship, and we'll see you in 4 weeks.
Previously on the Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
The money is one of the most broken things that we have right now, and it touches everybody's lives.
You don't ever want to find yourself in a position where the government has to rule how you feel about yourself, your money, your family, your choices, your aspirations.
All freedom starts with our freedom of thought. And no one can take that away from you except yourself.
It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Hi, it's Ronsley. If this is your first volume, welcome. This is a weekly series where I go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. I'm Australian and I'd like to acknowledge our traditional custodians of country where I live and work. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge our continuous connection and contribution to land, sea, and community. Today's conversation is a campfire chat with some of my favorite friends. It is an extension of our last volume when we got into the freedom of money. So definitely listen to the previous volume before you start this one. Follow me on Clubhouse at Ronsley, but most importantly, follow the club, the Psychology of Entrepreneurship Club on Clubhouse. We have some amazing conversations, amazing rooms, phenomenal topics, phenomenal people, and we would love to hear your voice. So please join us there to have this conversation. But today, we start with Brad Mills, who was also in volume 73. And as I said, this is an extension of the previous volume where we got into the freedom of everything: money, thought, ideas, and expression. So this is Brad Mills. He starts off talking about the fundamental reason why cryptocurrency is needed and what censorship resistance and decentralization really mean.
The main difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is you can come at this from the market perspective or from the fundamental perspective. And fundamentally, what makes a cryptocurrency valuable is the censorship resistance and the decentralization. And that's what was invented and discovered with Bitcoin. The ability for anybody to run a node, which prevents the government from coming in and stopping it. Just like BitTorrent, downloading movies on BitTorrent, it's not legal, but because it's so distributed, they just can't enforce the rules. They can't stop it. So, of course, Bitcoin is an open source technology, so it allowed anybody that had an idea to kind of like redo Bitcoin launch, but with faster block times or whatever narrative that they could come up with. It was open source, so it allowed people in the early days to just fork Bitcoin, just clone it basically, call their coin something else with a few different parameters, and a market developed for altcoins over the years. But one thing kept steady was Bitcoin kept continuing to grow and bring in more users, bring in more node runners. And then this sort of second side of this is the liquidity and the depth of the market and the Lindy effect. which is like the likelihood that Bitcoin is going to continue being the one that wins, because it is the one that has won and it continues to win. So it's much more likely to stay the number one cryptocurrency, because it is the number one cryptocurrency by far. So those are kind of the two main things, like the fundamental reason why cryptocurrency is needed: censorship resistance and decentralization, to be able to have a money that you can use for transactions which would otherwise be censored. And Bitcoin is the best at that.
So before this conversation, I was having a conversation with my dad about money and Bitcoin. And my dad asked me, where is Bitcoin actually kept? So I asked Jimmy Song that very question. This is his response.
It's a ledger, right? And if you ask him, where's your money in a bank account? He would say, well, it's at the bank. Well, where in the bank? Well, it's in the vault. Well, which of that money is yours? Well, then he wouldn't be able to tell you, right? Like it's basically on their ledger, and it's an entry on their ledger. And really, when they update that, that's what gets updated. Most of the money that they have is actually not physical. In fact, they have a very small portion of the money in physical form, like bills and notes, which is bills and coins, which is why if you try to take out $20,000 from the bank, they ask you to like call ahead, because they don't have that kind of cash on hand usually. So that's how all that stuff works, and you need to understand that is how Bitcoin is as well, because there's a ledger as well that everyone has access to, at least if you're running a full node. And when you're running a full node, there's an entry for every single Bitcoin that exists. It's called the UTXO set, and you can add up the ones that belong to you, and that's how you know. But it exists on the ledger in the same way that your money at the bank exists on a bank ledger.
Before we go any further, I'm just going to take a minute of your time to explain some of the terms you'll be hearing throughout this volume, because if you're like me and know nothing about Bitcoin, some of this can sound very foreign and confusing at first. So firstly, what are altcoins? Altcoins are any cryptocurrency that isn't Bitcoin. These coins were created after Bitcoin and present themselves as an alternative to the premier cryptocurrency. What is an NFT? An NFT is a non-fungible token. Think of it as a unique proof of ownership over something that you can't hold in your hand. So it could be a piece of digital art, a digital coupon, or even a video clip. An NFT is a one-of-a-kind piece of code that is stored and protected on a shared public exchange. What is a blockchain? A blockchain is a digital record of transactions. The name comes from its structure, since individual records, called blocks, are linked together in a list, called a chain. Blockchains are used for recording transactions made with cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin. And finally, nodes. Nodes form the infrastructure of a blockchain. They store, spread, and preserve the blockchain data. A full node is basically a computer that contains a full copy of the transaction history of the blockchain. I hope this helps.
Then we get deeper into where our money really goes. Again, this is Jimmy Song.
The way in which governments have seized money from their populace for a long time, often to fund social programs or wars, which are not good. World War I, for example, was largely funded through inflation, right? And it was, in a sense, one of the first total wars in the world, where countries completely destroyed each other instead of suing for peace when they thought they were going to lose, in large part because of this ability to continue to extract resources from the populace through inflation. So when you have centralization, you have somebody that is in charge of printing the money, and they can essentially print the money whenever they want and extract resources from the rest of the population and keep wars going and so on. That's why World War I and World War II were just so absolutely devastating. Wars before that, even on continental Europe, weren't nearly as devastating. And they certainly didn't cause complete impoverishment of the entire country like those wars did. Like it's important because it's essentially theft, and from a moral perspective, you want to prevent theft, especially theft by governments. At least like with explicit taxes, you theoretically have some say in it because you elect the representatives that vote those laws and taxes into legislation or whatever. But with inflation, you have no say, and the Federal Reserve can do it whenever they want, and so can the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, Bank of China, and all of them. And it's not only the people in the United States that are being taxed through that inflation. It's people everywhere. It's people that hold dollars in Nigeria or Indonesia or North Korea, and it's taxing all of them. And that's theft from the rest of the world, which I think is wrong.
We all have a narrative in our heads about different topics: sex, religion, politics, ideas, thoughts. So here we start talking about the narrative around Bitcoin. This is Brad Mills again.
So this is a common thing that I do hear from a lot of people. It is very common for people to just think that Bitcoin was started as a joke, and maybe not a joke in a disparaging way, but Bitcoin was started as an experiment and an idea, and the creators didn't have any specific goals around liberating people and promoting freedom from financial oppression, or even using it as decentralized money or a store of value. But I bought Bitcoin and started mining Bitcoin in 2011 to save for the rest of my life. I mean, I was opting out of a corrupt money system. And this is back in the time when Bitcoin was looked at as just for drugs or a bunch of libertarians and anarchists and stuff. That's what the mainstream narrative has been, that Bitcoin was started by a bunch of anarchists.
Jimmy Song added to that and went into the benefits of Bitcoin. Not only that, he went into some really important concepts about money that you need to understand. How it really works. Money is a phenomenal concept, and how it is laid and how it is worked and how value is stored inside money is really important. And we all need to understand that in school. So this is amazing. This you got to listen closely to. And this is Jimmy.
Well, first of all, there's Bitcoin and altcoins, and they're very different. And this is another common misconception, that they're all in the same category because the media kind of pushes them into the same category, that Bitcoin is the same thing as altcoins, that they're all decentralized or something like that. Let's get this clear. Bitcoin is actually decentralized. It doesn't have a single point of failure. It doesn't have a single person that controls things. They don't force you to upgrade. If there's a they that can force, then they're the centralized party. Every altcoin has some single point of failure, or is centralized in some way. So they're very different things. So decentralization is not a property that you can easily add to something. And that's something that is not obvious to a lot of people. But you can't just slap on decentralization to any project. By nature, any project generally has somebody that's in control, that creates new software or something like that. As far as the question is concerned, what benefits does it give people? Well, currently with the stock market the way it is, the real estate market the way it is, and U.S. dollars being printed, and the bond market and everything like that. Right now, the thing that Bitcoin gives that a lot of those assets can't is a way to store value that is separate from the current dollar system. So the Federal Reserve can more or less control a lot of these markets through various means. So, for example, with government spending, they are the lender of last resort. If the government decides to spend $1.9 trillion that it does not have, and no one else in the world is buying the U.S. treasuries, they step up and buy those treasuries. And that's a way in which they support government spending. If there are bonds that are very illiquid and would drop like a stone if some pension fund decided to sell them, that would be very bad for a lot of corporate and municipal bonds. So they give loans against those bonds in dollars so that the pension funds don't have to sell them. There are companies that are in liquidity crisis, and then they would also go out into the open market and buy some of these bonds that might be dropping like crazy. So a lot of these things have some and of course there's mortgage-backed securities which they're buying as a way to sort of prop up the real estate market. So the typical stores of value that most people use are very much things like stocks, bonds, and real estate. With Bitcoin, you have the ability to store value that is not controlled by the Fed. And that means that you have true diversification because it's not like all of those things tend to run together because the Fed's actions more or less control them. But with Bitcoin, you have something that has its own independent computer code controlled monetary policy. And that means that it's a separate store of value. And as seen in the last 10 years, it's been a very good store of value. It's gone up on average 200% a year. I'm not saying that that's going to be the case going forward, but I mean, it certainly seems like it this year. That level of being able to store value is very beneficial to individuals because now you don't have to go research what stock to buy or bond to buy or house to buy. You can just store value in Bitcoin, and you don't have to get lucky, right? Like there is a house, that in a neighborhood that happened to get really popular for some reason, versus another house that like stays stagnant because crime rose in the houses around them or something like that. It's a very fair store of value where you don't have to have insider knowledge, in other words, to be able to store value. You can be an Indonesian farmer or a Silicon Valley insider. Doesn't matter. You buy the same Bitcoin, and that's the major benefit.
So what does Jimmy mean when he refers to a central point of failure? All that it means is that there's not one single server where the information is stored. For example, Facebook is centralized, so if Facebook servers went down, no one can access it. Since Bitcoin is not centralized, if one server were to fail, it doesn't matter, because there are currently around 85,000 others where it's located. Hence, Bitcoin has no central point of failure.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Our aim with this audio documentary has always been to build a strong community of entrepreneurs and creatives to provide a space where they can use their voice to share their authenticity with the world. As a valued listener, your voice matters too. We love to hear your feedback and ideas, so don't be shy to let us know how we're doing in the ratings and comments. If you have a message for our production team or know someone who would be a perfect fit as a guest, you can find out more information on how to share your input at psychologyofontrepreneurship.com.
You can tell there's this us versus them sort of attitude towards alternate coins from the Bitcoin crowd and maybe vice versa. It kind of reminds me of the Catholic Church and the other Christian churches. It's really funny how different countries, depending on where you are, the other sect of religion is made fun of. So even though they all pray to the same Lord Jesus Christ. Anyway, maybe that's just a bad example, but that's what I think of. Anyway, here is more about what is a better currency in the long term. This is Jimmy Song.
That's the natural response that a lot of people have when they find out that Bitcoin is very expensive. And this has been the case throughout Bitcoin's history, is the people like 2017, 2013, people would look at it and say, what, $1,000? What, $10,000? I'm not going to go buy this thing. I want to go buy something cheaper. So they go look for something cheaper and buy like Litecoin for $40 or something. And they miss out on the gains that they would have had with Bitcoin And that's, I mean, maybe they gain a little bit on their altcoin or whatever, but from an opportunity cost perspective, Bitcoin over a long period of time has absolutely crushed every altcoin. And it's only because of new people coming in that sort of feel like they've missed out and missed the boat or something like that, that these altcoins thrive. And I think ultimately that comes down to some form of envy or wanting to get in early on something else, which is why it's never the same coins that pump like in each cycle. It's always something newer. So because that's attractive to the people that are coming in, it's okay, is there anything new that I can get into? And then maybe I can ride this up to the degree that Bitcoin does. The key thing to remember here is that Bitcoin is money. And the narrative that gets thrown around is that, hey, there's this other thing and it's actually a better tech or whatever. First of all, it doesn't have decentralization. If it's being launched or whatever, it doesn't have decentralization whatsoever. So it already loses on that regard. But people get seduced by, it's a better mousetrap. It's going to be Bitcoin, and you can get it on the ground floor on this one. It's never the case. Like if you study the history of money, there's a network effect to money, and it's not about bells and whistles around the money that make it valuable. The thing that money needs more than anything else is credible long-term scarcity. This is why the dollar is just terrible money at this point. And why gold was good money for like 6,000 years, because it had credible long-term scarcity. It was very hard for people to find it. As soon as that scarcity goes away, then it stops being money. Salt used to be money until somebody figured out how to produce lots of it. Glass beads used to be money until somebody figured out how to produce lots of it. Wampums used to be money. Rhinestones used to be money. All of these things used to be money until people figured out how to produce tremendous numbers of it in quantity. The Fed tomorrow could add all sorts of bells and whistles to the dollar and make it super convenient and do all sorts of other things. But that wouldn't change a thing about the fact that they can print more of the currency whenever they want. And ultimately, that's what makes currency really valuable, is that credible long-term scarcity. Bitcoin already has 12 years of history. Anything new, any altcoin or anything that's on coin market cap or whatever, all of those things are don't have the same kind of credibility. In fact, something like Ethereum has no credibility whatsoever on scarcity because they keep changing their monetary policy every 6 months. All of the other coins have the same problem. They don't have better credible long-term scarcity than Bitcoin because they haven't lasted as long.
If you are listening to this point, we get a little technical for the next minute. This is Jimmy. He's talking about how Bitcoin really works. He talks about block rewards, fees, inflation, and blockchains.
So basically, right now, miners are awarded a block reward and fees. Fees come from separate the transactions that are included in the block, but also they're paid in the form of new Bitcoin that come into existence. This is the inflationary part of Bitcoin. And they're currently that block reward is 6.25 Bitcoins. The fees end up being around 0.75 to 1 Bitcoin, somewhere around there. So currently, it's about anywhere between like 12 to 18% of each block reward comes from the actual fees. So when the block rewards run out, which by the way won't happen until like 2120 or something like that, although by then it'll be a tiny amount. In about 8 to 12 years, we'll probably have more fees than block reward. At that point, the fees are what the miners are going to work for. And this is the way that it was framed by Lynn Alden, I thought was very useful, because currently, if you think about it, each block reward is really reward for the miner securing the blockchain. So currently, the security of the blockchain is being paid by about 12 to 18% by the transactors, and about the rest of it, 82 to 88%, by the holders, because it's inflating. So anytime you have inflation, the value is being taken away from the people that are currently holding it. So as we transition into more of a fee market, essentially we're we're taking the cost of security from the entire network towards the people that are actually using it, right? Like the people that are actually transacting. So the burden is slowly shifting towards them, and that's a very good thing because like socializing the cost of anything, which to be fair, Satoshi had to do as a part of the design of Bitcoin. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any Bitcoins in existence. It's a transition from, I guess, what you would call a more socialized cost structure for security for Bitcoin to a more individual or capitalistic fee market, which is where we're going.
Jimmy, does Bitcoin ever stabilize against the dollar?
Well, against the dollar, I'm not sure it ever stabilizes. I think at some point, Bitcoin completely displaces the dollar as the world reserve currency, at which point it's the dollar that will be volatile to Bitcoin and not the other way around, if the dollar's even around by then. And that's the thing, is that in any free market economy, you're going to have prices that are sort of volatile against other things. It's very rare that two commodities sort of, are in sync the entire time and don't have very much volatility against each other. That's just how free markets work, depending on the needs and wants of the entire population, right? At some point, soybeans might be things that people want. Other times, steel might be. Other times, it's pork or something. There are preferences that the people around the world just sort of like want and need and change as a result, and that's why it's not stable. And ultimately, I think Bitcoin becomes the world reserve currency. At that point, who knows what the dollar value of it is? At that point, we won't really be using the dollar. And the thing is, like a lot of people are like, oh, well, then how's anything going to work? I price everything in dollars. Oh, well, you might, but there's a lot of people around the world that don't. And the thing about companies like Visa, MasterCard, Amex, or banks or whatever is that they can just as easily denominate in Bitcoin as they can in all of these other things. Visa already denominates in 40 different currencies or something like that. They can easily add Bitcoin. And if you're settling in Bitcoin, then you count your wealth in Bitcoin instead of dollars like we do now. So I think our mentality completely shifts and we have a different perspective on the whole thing rather than it's stabilizing against the dollar. I don't think that ever happened.
And then Brad Mills added to that, talking about the volatility of currencies in general.
As you switch to a Bitcoin denominated mentality, you think in Bitcoin, then you lose volatility compared to assets. But for most people in the world, and for just in general, if you look at the data, the currencies aren't, stable against each other. Currencies are extremely volatile against each other. Like, I'm a Canadian and I have Canadian dollars and US dollars. And in my lifetime, the currency has swung probably 50% up and down. My dollar is worth more than the US dollar, and then it's worth like half a dollar then it's down to like $1.42 or something like that. It's very volatile, and the euro is the same way. The currencies aren't super stable, and neither are other major commodities like oil or gold even. Of course, they're more stable than Bitcoin when you think of it in dollar terms, but oil showed that it's more volatile than Bitcoin in 2020. So if you go to woobull.com, he has a chart on there which compares the volatility of Bitcoin to other major asset classes. And the volatility of Bitcoin is trending downwards, and Bitcoin is actually now less volatile than emerging currencies and oil. It's approaching the volatility of some of the other major assets like the stock market and gold and major currencies. So, I think that as Bitcoin continues to evolve and become a bigger market cap, and you start seeing central banks maybe put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, or sovereign wealth funds like the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund controls $1 trillion of wealth, they're going to eventually have Bitcoin. They've already signaled they were going to buy Bitcoin a couple of years ago. It wasn't big enough for them. they need to have the market cap of Bitcoin to be really big. Right now, it's like about a little over $1 trillion or so. And as Bitcoin gets to the same level of market cap in dollars as gold, 10 trillion or something like that, it's going to have probably the same volatility as gold does to the US dollar. But that also depends on how bad the US dollar, like the central banks could hyperinflate the dollar, and then all bets are off with volatility.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
That conversation has been a little slice of heaven. So we're going to do more of those. And if you're interested to hear them live and join us live, and we would love to hear your voice in whatever capacity it allows us to, please follow the Psychology of Entrepreneurship Club on Clubhouse, and also follow me at Ronsley. It would be amazing to get you on and get your perspective on different things. In the meantime, go have fun.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Editing, voiceovers, and sound design by Kaylee Bonnyman and Tiago Vega. Guest research by Jenna Elliott. Content by Corinne Castles. Project managed by the legend that is Kaylee Bonnyman. Produced and hosted by me, Ronsley Vaz. For more episodes and way to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Love the polished audio docuseries style of this podcast, The Psychology of Entrepreneurship? At We Are Podcast, you can learn how to create a similar style for your own show. This revolutionary virtual event assembles podcasters, entrepreneurs, and marketers in one spot, so you're able to learn from the masters. Head straight to wearepodcast.com to reserve your spot at our next event.